what is the SAML and how we can use that in our approach. So basically, in the general terms, like SAML is like kind of the full form is the security assertion markup language. And what is that? Just we need to be understand like what is the concept behind that. So let's take an example. Let's suppose you have a website, right? And in that website or in your application, or we can say the in your SP, in the terms of SAML, we call the SP. SP means service provider, right? So you need to allow a user to to logged in without inserting any ID or password to your application or to your website, or we can say to your service provider. Yes. Sorry for that. Actually, I just missed that one. Let me share again. Now it's visible. Okay. So let me start from first. So we have a website, right? So we called the service provider, and in that we have a ability to allow user to log in, but not using our application authentication. Either we will allow user to use our SAML, or we can say the identity provider authentication. So in that case, like in our demo, we are going to use a one login ID provider. So that is kind of free for developer. So you just need to log in or register yourself by using your company email ID, or we can say your work email ID, right? So we are going to use the one login for that. The concept is whenever your user comes or visit your website, or we can say visit your application, in that you need to be just cross check with your identity provider that user is already logged in or not. If some case user might be new to your browser, then he or she will able to click on the login button that will redirect to your ID provider to authenticate that particular user, right? So if user is already authenticated and it's a valid user, then your ID provider return you a valid data which belongs to that user, or we can say it return the identity card that introduce that user to your website, right? So when we are getting response back from the ID, we will expect some basic information, kind of we can say we will get a email from ID provider, right? So let's suppose we have a email, or we can have a first name, right? Or we can say the last name. So kind of things we will get back from the one login, right? So this is the concept called the SSO, single sign on. Okay. Parallelly, you might have a more than one SP, right? So currently we have only one SP, but you might have like if we're taking the example for the Google, so here is we can say a Gmail, right? Here we have the Gmail. But parallelly, if you open the YouTube in second tab, I think you not need to log in back for the YouTube. That will be automatically logged in your system bar, or we can say the logged in bar, right? Or we can say the right corner of your browser, right? So that will be automatically logged in. And parallelly, if you open any Google app which is associated with the Google, let's say we can, if you open the Google Drive, that also be logged in, right? So if you open the Google Drive, so that's also be logged in automatically, right? So in this process, what Google is doing, when your page is loading to the browser, or let's suppose when the page is hit your domain, then it's just doing a authentication with the SSO, or we can say the identity provider, and sending a request to the identity provider and just validate the user which is currently requesting, right? So if the user is validate, then they just allow you to log in into the different application. They will not ask you again the identity, or we can say the ID and password, right? So that is the concept, we can say the SSO, or we can say we can use the as a terms of the SAML, right? So think of the SAML authentication as being like a identification card, a short standardized way to show who someone is, right? Instead of say conducting a series of DNA tests and to confirm someone identity, it's possible to just glance at their ID card, nothing else, right? And in computing and networking, one of the major challenge is getting system and devices built by different vendor for different purpose to work together, right? So might be Gmail is developed by the different vendor, or might be YouTube is they currently they have a parent, like same parent company, that is the Google. That's fine, but might be in some case Google also have the sub companies kind of Gmail, YouTube, Drive, and so on. So this is the challenging part to make work together. This is called the interoperability, which we call the interoperability, right? The ability for different machines to interact with each other despite their differing technical specification. SAML is an interoperable standard. It's a widely accepted way to communicate user identity to the cloud service providers, right? So the concept is, we can say, it's generally giving you the callback kind of, and then you can authenticate on your website, or we can say the application, right? Okay, so this is the concept behind the SSO, and how we can integrate in our project. We can see the Laravel. So let's take a look. Okay, so if you are searching for some packages or might be some library, I just found a Laravel SAML 2, and currently, by the way, we are working, or we are also going to be integrate the SAML version 2, which is the latest one, right? So we are going to use this library. So let me show how we can integrate that library in our project, or we can say how we can install that library in our application. So here is the some basic steps we need to be just follow. So you can install this package via Composer. So just let me copy that one, and let me open our project. So here is that, and I can install that Composer dependency. So let it be done. It's downloading. Meanwhile, it's downloading. We can have a account on the OneLogin. For demo purpose, I already did the login, but you can register yourself on the OneLogin. So, mm, okay, I'm sending that URL. Okay, you guys just need to be register yourself. It would be better if you can do parallelly, because might be there like configuration, so you miss out that during the session. So whenever you open that OneLogin, in the right hand side, you will see that I am interested in work identity. So if you just click on that, there should be a developer tools and APIs. So you just need to be select that one. That will be bring you the developer sign up page. In that, you just need to be mention your company email address and some basic information about you as well. Nothing much. So it will send a confirmation email to your email. So just confirm and let it be completed first. Yeah, it would be better if you have that one already, so we can just create a application instead of making the extra sign up, right? So in that dashboard you will be find a new application, so we will be create a new application. Okay, so unfortunately we have a error for that is the Laravel passport, and let me check that one. Okay, let me just do some R&D on. Let me comment it for now. Now going back to the terminal and hit the composer require again. That is updating dependency, nothing to install and update to remove. That is fine. Okay, bad. Whenever you just logged in, you will be see this kind of interface, right? So just skip that one, and you can see here I am having a one SSO application, but in your case you need to be visit let's suppose the administrator, and in that you will be see there should be a application. So in that application you can just create a new application for that. Okay, so let's suppose you just click on the new application, and in my case I already have that application, so I will not create any new application. But in your case you can just search for the SAML, let me remove that one, test connector, right? So you can just pick that one, right? So whenever you just pick that one, it will be like bring you a create new application, and you in that you need to be mention your display name and all the configuration, and that you will be able to save, right? But I have already, so let's move to the existing one. So let's suppose I have a Edureka. So here is my display name, and here is the tab which I am getting from that domain. So I just put it KS Tech as of now because my might be my company email address was already taken someone else. So I will not continue with my company name. I just put my own. So here after the creation you will be land up with that. So as of now you can just see we only have the info tab while we creating, but once you save that one, that will be brings you that all the entire tabs having into the left hand side. Okay, so we successfully register ourselves using the test sample connector, right? Okay, now you need to, okay, so first I guess let me check we done, yep, so we completed. Now let's move to the library part, sorry the app text. So here we use that installation, so that will be install our dependency. And then if you are using a less than uh, Laravel version, which is like less than should be 5.5, but we are using I think Laravel 8, so that not is required steps, so we can just skip that one. Then to publish your configurations you just need to run that command. So just take a copy and just hit in your terminal and just publish the some configurations file. So once you run that command, that will say we copied a file from the vendor folder to your configuration folder. First file is the SAML2 underscore settings.php, right? And the second file, this is also copied, which is for the ID provider. So in that case, we are just using the default ID provider file, which is just having the tests prefix, right? So test prefix we have a also again the ID settings file. Okay, so let's open this file and have a look. So either you can just control and click if you are using the VS Code, or you can visit a config directory in that. So you will have a new folder that is called the SAML2, and which is mentioned already here. And we have a brand new file that is called the SAML settings, right? So in that, if you are using some routes of the SAML, that will be follow this structure, like the whatever the route prefix you have. So you just need to be setting your, in your application, might be in your application you would like to some different kind of prefix in your URL, but let it be default. And then after, you need to be define the IDP name. So in our case we just have a test, but in your case might be you have some more than one IDP provider. Let's suppose if we are using, currently you are using the OneLogin, so in your case that should be a OneLogin kind of file, right? Or if you are using the Microsoft SSO, then there should be a, like, you can rename that one, or you can just put the Microsoft SSO. So it, here is the case, might be you have a more than one IDP providers, right? And whatever the IDP providers you have, then after you should have some default routes. Let's suppose if you going to be logged in, or if you are allowing user to log in, then you just need to be visit that login URL. And if you need to get some data about the your configuration, you can just hit the metadata, so that will be provide you some basic configuration of the system, right? And again there is like a basic routes. And if you are using the default routes, you can just make it a true. And you can provide your route prefix if you need to be customized that one, but that is fine for me. And here is some kind of routes middleware. If you need to be integrated, then you can just put here. So Laravel 5.2 will need a group which includes start session, right? So that is fine for me. And here is again like kind of what kind of the routes prefix or route you need to be configure in your system. So that is fine, like what will be the login route, what will be the error route. So we just, as of now, we just put onto the main, we can say the home routes, which is just a slash. In your case might be you need to be handle the error on the error page, right? Like kind of error page, so you can just mention your own routes, but let it be default as of now. And there is a like proxyware, so we are just not changing any kind of settings as of now, right? Okay, and let's look at test IDP settings. So in that, first, this is a environment variable name, that is the ID. Okay, and here we are getting a URL, or we can say the configuration from env. If you are not declare any kind of environment variable in your env file, then it will be take a default that one, right? So this kind of settings we also have into the test IDP settings. And in that, we will not doing the service provider settings from here. We will set up that service provider into the one login dashboard, and we will do some IDP settings here, of course, and we will try to replace these URLs. Okay, so let's jump to the library part. So we did the configuration and we published some configuration. This will be add some files. Okay, so we just have a look into that, which you will need to be customized. The my test IDP1 IDP settings PHP config is handled almost directly by one login, right? So this one is the default, but might be in our case that is not something which we are looking. I think this one was the test.idp instead of the my test, so that is fine for us. Okay, so here is some configurations we need to be set up. So if you have the more than one, you can just put that one. We already covered that one. Okay, here is the we going to be have a new folder. or if in your case you might be need to be create your own, then you can just rename that or copy that file and rename that file and just put your system configurations. Okay, but again if you go with some like kind of what we call the env file settings, then you can just put this into the env file. So that will be uh, the configuration that will be covered from your .env file instead of the direct file what we have into the SAML2 folder. Okay, so let it be default, and now I think we need to be set up the one login part. So these are the some basics things. When you install your composer library, you will got this all the libraries and settings in your configuration folder, right? Now let's move to the one login. So might be one of you is able to sign up, so we will probably having this kind of screen. So here you can see a tab which is called the SSO, and this is the identity provider section for our settings. So we just need to be click on that. There you can see we have some basic information about the SSO. So first is a issuer URL, and that should be mapped in our application setting.php file. So here you can just copy that one, and in the settings you can just put that uh, what we call the IDP provider, and you can just put into the I what we call the entity ID, right? So the issuer URL will map to the entity ID, but again we will going to be like deploy this application to the development staging, or they might be have some different configurations. So instead of putting into the config file, we will keep it into the in the env file, right? So let me just copy that variable from here and env. So here I'm going to be declare a new variable, so just put it here. Now you can see in between that we are having some kind of variable, so just copy that variable name and let me find what is the value of that. So you can see this have the test default value, so just let me replace that one, test. Okay, so we have a identity URL, so let me copy that issuer URL to the identity URL, so just paste it here. Now what next? So in the settings, the SAML endpoint, yeah, so that will be point to the single sign on service. So let's take a look where is that. And if you are visiting the ITP service provider, in that you will find a section IDP, and you can see the single sign-on service, right? So here is again we are using the variable that is called the IDP SSO URL. So let me just copy that and just duplicate that line, and instead of the IDP SSO URL, so let me just replace that one. Okay, and here we having the double score underscore, so just me remove that one, and now just let me copy that URL, so I will replace that one. Okay, now let going back, and here is the SSLO endpoint, so that will be kind of logout endpoint, so we can map into our settings with the single logout service. So let me copy that one, and so that should be a single logout service, and here we have a environment variable for that, so that is called the sl underscore url. sl underscore url. So instead of sso, sl underscore url, and I already copied that one, so just put here. Okay, now what next we have remaining? So we just, okay, so again we copy these three url, and now I think we have to be copy also the certificate. So just click on view detail, or just copy that string, or either you can the download that one, but that is fine, like I just copy that one. In the settings, either you can provide it here in the env file, or you can just put the string as we have for that one, right? So that will be very going to be long string. Yeah, so let me just copy that one, and let me put into the env file, and there is again two idp, so just remove one now. Okay, so we have that one, and now going back to the service provider, identity provider, and let me just copy these lines, but I think that should be in one line, put in a single line. Okay, now it's comes into the single line. Okay, so we did set up for that configuration part of the SAML. Now, after copying the value from the SSO tab into the IDP section of your settings, okay, so that would be like, we can say, if you are taking the example, that would be kind of, we also declare some like env files configurations, right? So that would be look like that. And just if you cross check with that, here we have the SAML configurations, right? So that is completed. Now it's time to define service provider values into the settings file. Okay, so till now we just introduce our idp to our application, right? But now it's time to tell the idp, or we can say the identity provider, or in our case we can say the OneLogin, to having some request from our application, right? So now we need to be tell to the identity provider, like you need to be prepared to having some requests from my domain, right? So in our case, our domain and the data and which URL need to be post in which configuration, so that can be achieved by the metadata. And if you are visiting the SAML settings file, here should be a URL that is called the metadata. Okay, so let me first run the application php artisan serve. Okay, so there is the local host and 8000. So let me open that URL, localhost, and port is the 8000 slash, in our case we have the SAML2, that is fine, and we have the test file for that, and here should be a metadata. Okay, so URL saying not found, and where we made the mistake, if you are going back and just copy that one, SAML2 and the test one, all things seems like fine for me. Might be we having some caching issue, so let me open the git base instead of having that command php addition route list. Sport HTTP authorization controller does not PHP addition clear. PHP addition route list. Yep. So we did clear the routes and just hit the route back, but we are not getting any routes as the part of the our route list. Okay, let me clear the PHP annotation device. PHP. So now we got the SAML routes, right? This should be appear, just need to be clear all the things. So I just run the command, which is the PHP artisan optimize. Okay, now going back to the browser, and we need to be run the metadata URL. Yep. So that brings some information which need to be put into the OneLogin. We need to be put some values into the configuration of our application. So let's open the configuration tab. Here is we need to be do some settings for that. So for the audience, which is the entity ID, we need to be insert the metadata URL, right? So you can see I already have that one. So if you are visiting that one, there should be a metadata. For that, you will be see the kind of entity descriptor, right? So that will be entity ID URL, and that should be inserted into the here audience, or we can see the entity ID. And if you are searching for entity ID, that will be find easily, right? So whatever value you have into the entity ID, you just need to be put that audience entity ID. Okay. About the recipient, here you will be have the ascension consume service. So let me search for assertion, sorry, consume service. Yep. So that is have, and the location for that we need to be just copy that URL and put into here. So I think in my case, yeah, that is simple. Okay. And that should be a validator, that should be a dot and asterisk sign, that always be same, right? And the consumer URL, we can say that also be same as we have for the recipient, right? There will be no change. Again, singles logout URL, for that you will search for into the metadata. So there should be a single logout service, single logout service. Yep. And its location is the, we have a SLS, right? So just put it here into the single logout URL. Now I think all is fine to me, right? We set audience, that is entity ID, recipient, validator, and the ACS URL and the single logout URL, right? So all is fine. And again, relay state would always be blank, right? Now we can just save our configuration tab. So just hit the save button. That will be redirect back you to the info tab. Okay, now all the settings which we provided, that is the done, right? So what next? So in that you can see Laravel have some events handler. So if you are going to log in a user into the ID provider, that will create a event. So you just need to be handle that event. So for in our case, just copy that event handler and let me put into the event service provider. So that will be inside that providers, and here should be a event service provider. So I can put that here, or you can create, if you want to be create a separate one, you just need to be create a separate event listener, but again that should be going to be a new topic for us, but let it be here for now, right? Okay, and I think this something is missing, so you can include that one, I guess, in very above of that our code. So you can just use that one, that will be solve our dependencies. Okay, so here we going to have a log user data. Once your user is logged in and authenticated by the ID provider, then after you will be have a some data back from the ID provider, and you can handle it your own base, like if you need to be handled as a register part, you do that registration, and again if you need to be just allow the user as a logged in, so you can do whatever your the business logic will be here. Like in our case, what we will do, we will just check the user email is exist in our application or not. If user exists, then we will just do the auth logged in as, right, user id. So in that, like whenever you're doing the query or the user data, like a user where, and if you finding the user by the email id, the user data, there should be a id, so that will be written a sorry, the response. So in that you can just check if the user is a valid user, then you can do the logged in by just getting the user id. So you can just provide a user, sorry, user id, right? And otherwise that should be need to include it. Okay, and that also need to be included. Okay, otherwise you can register the user in our application, user in application. So that going to be again like user, new user, and kind of user, that should be an email, and here in the user data you will find a email in the id, right? So you can do that way, but let's keep it for you, you will be going to do your own. So let me remove that one, I will be just dump the data here, that should be a user data. Okay, so our configuration and all the settings are done. Now it's time to look into the browser for that login. So we know that we have a URL for allowing user to log in to the identity provider. So SAML, in our case, that should be a SAML2 slash test slash login. So going back, and instead of that, I need to be do the login. So that will be doing request to the, and you can see it's redirect to the URL, and we successfully having the data back from the SAML, right? So that can be, you can handle like I am getting the first name and also the last name, all the things which I am getting from the getting back from the OneLogin, right? So that is the process we call the SAML login, and we know that we can handle into the event listener. So once the SAML login is completed, that will be hit a event by this library, and we just put a listener for that. So that will be listen that event, and execute our entire code here. So your login and register process will also be the part of that listener. Or if you, in your case, might be you need to be do some business, like lot of lines in that listener, so you can just create your separate listener. So in that event listener of the Laravel documentation, you will have a idea how you can create a listener for that event, and you can just map that listener here. This is very simple thing, right? So I guess this is the process we need to be integrate in your application, that is called the SAML SSO integration.